In the cold heart of imperial Russia, beneath the golden domes of palaces and the weight of centuries-old traditions, a man was born to rule a vast empire that stretched across 2 continents. His name was Nicholas Alexandrovich Romanov. The year was 1868, and he was destined to become the last emperor of Russia, a man whose reign would witness both the height of royal splendor and the collapse of an ancient dynasty. This is the story of Nicholas II, the last Tsar of Russia. Nicholas was born into unimaginable privilege. His father, Tsar Alexander III, was a towering figure, strong, iron-willed, and unbending in his rule. But Nicholas was different. He was gentle, polite, deeply religious, and unprepared for the brutal realities of ruling a restless empire. When his father died suddenly in 1894, Nicholas ascended the throne at just 26. The world expected greatness, but the young Tsar himself whispered in despair, "I am not ready to be a Tsar." His coronation in 1896 was a grand spectacle. Thousands filled the streets of Moscow. But what began in celebration ended in tragedy. A stampede at the Kodinka field left over 1,000 people dead. It was seen as a bad omen, and many whispered that the reign of Nicholas II was cursed from the very beginning. Nicholas was a man torn between tradition and change. He believed in his divine right to rule, that God himself had chosen him to be Tsar. But Russia was changing, industry was rising, cities were growing, and the people were demanding reform. In his heart, Nicholas wanted to be a loving father and a faithful husband, not a ruthless ruler. Yet destiny had other plans. In 1894, he married Princess Alex of Hesse, a German princess who became Empress Alexandra Feodorovna. Their love was deep and sincere, but it would bring them both joy and sorrow. They had 4 daughters, Olga, Tatiana, Maria, and Anastasia, and finally a long-awaited son, Alexei, the heir to the throne. But the boy was born with hemophilia, a life-threatening disease that made even a small injury deadly. This secret would haunt the royal family, leading them to place their trust in a mysterious man named Grigory Rasputin. Rasputin, the Siberian mystic with piercing eyes and a strange power, entered their lives as a healer. He seemed to ease Alexei's suffering, and the Tsarina came to see him as God's chosen messenger. But to the nobles and the public, Rasputin was a scandal, a drunken monk whose influence corrupted the royal court. As his power grew, so did hatred for the imperial family. Meanwhile, Nicholas faced a storm outside the palace walls. In 1904, he led Russia into war with Japan, a conflict he believed would be swift and glorious. Instead, it became a disaster. The Russian fleet was annihilated, soldiers died by the thousands, and the empire's prestige shattered. The people's anger boiled over. In 1905, peaceful protesters marched to the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg, carrying icons and petitions, hoping the Tsar would hear their cries. But soldiers opened fire. Hundreds were killed in what became known as Bloody Sunday. The Tsar of all Russia had become the enemy of his own people. Shaken by the uprising, Nicholas reluctantly allowed reforms, creating the Duma, a parliament meant to give the people a voice. But he never truly accepted it. He believed his power came from God alone, and every step toward democracy felt like betrayal. The divide between ruler and people grew wider with each passing year. By 1914, Europe was on the brink of catastrophe. When Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated, the great powers of Europe moved toward war. Nicholas, bound by alliance and honor, took Russia into the First World War. He hoped to defend the Slavic nations and uphold his empire's pride, but what followed was horror beyond imagination. The Russian army was ill-prepared, poorly equipped, and badly led. Millions of soldiers died on the front lines. The economy collapsed, food grew scarce, cities descended into chaos. While Nicholas was away commanding the army personally, a move that left the government in disarray, his wife, Alexandra, and Rasputin effectively ruled in his absence. The people's hatred deepened. They saw in the Tsarina a German spy and in Rasputin a devil. By 1916, Rasputin's influence had become intolerable to the Russian nobles. A group of aristocrats conspired to kill him. They poisoned him, shot him, and finally drowned him. Yet even his death could not save the monarchy. The empire was falling apart. In February 1917, years of anger exploded into revolution. Workers and soldiers took to the streets, demanding bread, peace, and freedom. The army, once loyal to the Tsar, joined the uprising. Nicholas, isolated and powerless, abdicated the throne. Over 3 centuries of Romanov rule ended in a single stroke of a pen. The Tsar, who had believed himself chosen by God, was now just Nicholas Romanov. He and his family were placed under house arrest, first in the Alexandra Palace, then in Tobolsk, and finally in Yekaterinburg, deep in the Ural Mountains. There, in quiet exile, the family prayed, read, and hoped that someday they would be rescued. But the new Bolshevik government saw them as a threat to the revolution. On a dark July night in 1918, the guards came for them. Nicholas, Alexandra, their 5 children and a few loyal servants were led to a basement under the pretext of safety. There, under the dim light, they were told they were to be executed. Nicholas barely had time to cross himself before the gunfire erupted. The bullets tore through the walls and the Romanov dynasty ended in blood and silence. The news of their deaths shocked the world. The last Tsar, once one of the most powerful men on earth, had died a prisoner. His empire gone, his name cursed by some, mourned by others. But history would not forget him. In the years that followed, Russia became the Soviet Union. Palaces turned into museums and portraits of Nicholas II were torn down. Yet time softened the memory. Decades later, the remains of the Romanovs were discovered and buried with honor. In 2000, the Russian Orthodox Church canonized Nicholas, Alexandra, and their children as martyrs, the Passion Bearers. Nicholas II's life is one of the most tragic in all of history. A man of deep faith and love, caught in the tides of change he could not control. He ruled an empire of millions but could not rule his destiny. His downfall was not just his own, it was the end of an age, the twilight of kings and empires. Even today, the story of Nicholas II echoes through time, a warning and a lament. Power without vision is fragile, faith without understanding is blind, and an empire built on fear and silence will one day crumble under the voice of its people. As the snow falls gently over the ruins of his palaces, the spirit of the last Tsar lingers, a haunting reminder of how even the mightiest crowns can fall to dust, and how history, though it forgets no kings, remembers the lessons of their fall forever.